Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin's our guest, and it's an Ask Me Anything today, so get ready for some fun. We've got 2 hours of Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin. I am watching the phones literally light up right now. My phone is literally lighting up. 888-318-7884 is the number. 888-318-7884. If you have a question about the Catholic faith, you want to talk about Jesus, the Bible, you want to talk about the councils of the church, the moral teachings of the church, give us a call, 888-318-7884. And there's another category Jimmy's happy to take questions on, and that is called anything else. Jimmy Akin, senior apologist here at well, there is one exception. I know that. Senior apologist here at Catholic Answers and the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World and the Jimmy Akin podcast. Hello, Jimmy Akin.
Hello, Psychelit. Yeah, so in addition to talking about what the Catholic Church has to say about some stuff, I'll be happy to talk about what the Catholic Church doesn't have to say about stuff, about any other topic.
888-318-7884. You were just mentioning to me before we went on the air, you were doing a dialogue about Hinduism and Catholicism, or Hinduism and Christianity, or Catholicism today, or
both.
Yeah.
Folks have noticed that I have kind of a knack for being able to do interfaith dialogues, and so I've been invited on some shows of people who have other faiths, and I've dialogued a few times with people from the Hindu tradition, and I had another one of those today. So next week there's going to be a video coming out where I dialogue for a couple of hours with a Hindu gentleman, and we talk about Christianity more generally and more specifically, and where it's similar to and different from Hinduism.
Very cool. Very cool. So I'll tell you what, maybe you're a Hindu person and you'd like to call and ask Jimmy a question. 888-318-7884. It is Friday, however, and we get a new episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World each Friday. And Jimmy, today's episode is...
Well, actually, I'll give you, before I give you that, I'll give you one little thing that people may not realize about Hinduism.
Okay, all right.
But here in the West, people have the idea that Hinduism is polytheistic, that they believe in many gods. And there are Hindus who consider themselves polytheists, but what a lot of Americans don't realize is that most Hindus consider themselves monotheists, that there is ultimately one God, one divine reality, and that all the different so-called gods that they worship are just symbols or manifestations of that one underlying deity. And so something to be aware of, a lot of Hindus are actually monotheists.
That is, so, that's fascinating.
In fact,
to me.
most Hindus are actually monotheists.
So then do you get this question from Hindu people? Could Jesus just be another of these manifestations of the one God? That's a common...
That question comes up. In fact, a lot of Hindus would say, I don't have any problem with the idea of Jesus being the Son of God.
Yeah.
They just would understand God in a somewhat different way, but they have no problem saying, yeah, Jesus is divine.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. So Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World today.
Yeah. So today on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, we look at the Kardashev scale. The Kardashev scale it was proposed by a Russian astronomer named Kardashev, who has an exciting life story. But it's a way of classifying different advanced civilizations based on the amount of energy that they have at their disposal. So a type 1 civilization, the way the Kardashev scale is normally articulated, would have the energy of an entire planet at its disposal. A type 2 Kardashev civilization would have the energy at its disposal of an entire star, and a type 3 Kardashev civilization would have the energy of an entire galaxy at its disposal. So if you think about it, like Star Trek would be kind of a type 2 civilization, but the Empire from Star Wars would be a type 3 civilization. And based on these categories, one can deduce certain things about what these civilizations would be like, what they would and wouldn't be able to do, and that would give us clues to find them. And in fact, we may have already found evidence of some type 2 or 3 civilizations that are out there or could be out there in space. We may have already picked up on some of the things they've been doing. So we talk about that on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World this week. But there's also the Jimmy Akin podcast. And this week, the most recent episode last Monday was on the shortest verse in the Bible.
Oh, yeah.
Jesus wept, and what that tells us about Jesus and what it tells us about ourselves. And a lot of people have written and said they found that a very moving episode because it helped them understand suffering and emotion and how to process those in light of Jesus. Coming up on Monday, I have a video where I'm interacting. This coming Monday, I have a video where I'm interacting with a young Protestant apologist named Wes Huff. And he recently came to prominence, debating a gentleman named Billy Carson. And the consensus is Wes Huff just decimated him in the debate. But Wes has also been saying some stuff about the canon of Scripture.
Oh.
And he's coming from a Protestant position, so I don't expect him to agree with the Catholic view. But I've been kind of startled at people would send me links to videos he's done. And I've been kind of startled at, if I can put it this way, the circumscribed nature of his knowledge on the canon. And so in a friendly spirit of iron sharpens iron, I produced a video interacting with what Wes Huff has said about the canon and where he takes a few missteps.
Oh, very good. Very exciting. That's I had heard. Was that on Joe Rogan or something that they debated?
Yeah, he
Or-
was on. He was on.
yeah.
He didn't debate on Joe Rogan, but he did go on Joe Rogan.
I gotcha. Yeah. Joe Rogan's the place to go nowadays. All right. I'll tell you what, 888-318-7884 is the number, but we're going to have to take some calls before lines open up. So off to Florida we go. Eduardo in Florida. Eduardo, thank you for calling again.
Hi, God bless you.
You too. Thank you.
So basically, I wanted to ask if the following text might be like a good basis for what is known as, I think, sensus fidelium. Basically, the idea that the church will not err as a whole.
Okay.
The text is 2 John 1-3, but actually you can call it just 1-2, and it says, "The elder to the lady chosen by God, and to her children, whom I love in the truth, and not I only, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth which lives in us and will be with us forever." So I think it can be interpreted different ways as any passage, but I don't know if you might. What would you say against it? Kind of if you were to take the contrary position.
Well, I would say that, I'll give you my appraisal first, and then I'll give you what I would say in response. My appraisal is that this is linked with the sensus fidelium. Sensus fidelium is Latin. It means the sense of the faithful. And so the idea is that God's Holy Spirit maintains an awareness of Christian truth in the faithful. And I think that, when John says that the truth lives in us or abides in us and will be with us forever, that is a reference to the sensus fidelium. But that doesn't tell you anything. This is where the kind of pushback would come. That doesn't tell you anything about what that truth is, and it also doesn't guarantee that you as an individual are going to remain in it. You can infer that as long as you remain a faithful Christian, that one of the fideles, one of the faithful, that you will have the truth abiding in you. But that doesn't mean that you can't use your free will to leave the status of being a faithful Christian. You could, in fact, entirely apostatize and leave the Christian faith altogether, in case you wouldn't have the truth abiding in you. It would abide in the faithful, but it wouldn't abide in you since you're not one of the faithful anymore. It also doesn't tell you anything about what that truth is. People with radically different ideas could all claim that that they have the faith, that they are members of the faithful and have the truth abiding in them. So a Catholic could claim that, an evangelical Protestant could claim that, a Mormon could claim that, a Jehovah's Witness could claim that. All kinds of different people with radically different views could all claim on the basis of 2 John 2 that they have the truth dwelling in them. And you can't settle, since John doesn't go further in this verse, you'd have to appeal to other verses to establish what that truth is and which of the different individuals are correct in claiming that that they're abiding in the truth or living in the truth.
Eduardo, I got to go to the break, so I'm going to leave it there. I hope that was helpful to you. Thank you very much for the question. Right back with more Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Catch Catholic Answers live anytime at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
This is Father Dwight Longenecker. Catholic Radio helps to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ around the world in the fullness of the Catholic faith. With sound teaching, orthodox theology, reverent worship, EWTN is doing the very best work we can to spread the fullness of the faith in the Catholic Church throughout the whole world.
The world needs EWTN Catholic Radio, now more than ever.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and it's Ask Me Anything today with Jimmy Akin. The lines being full, back to them we go. I don't know what that sentence construct was, but that was fascinating. Rory in San Francisco, California, thank you for the call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. Jimmy, I think you said something a few months ago that raises a few questions from my end. In the end of one of your videos on the Book of Enoch, you said that it's possible for the East and the West to reunite even despite theological differences. For example, you said that the consecration is believed to take place at a different part in the East than in the West. And then
Commonly.
you also mentioned the different... And then that the canons, of course, are different. So if the East and the West were to reunite, could you explain how the differences would be handled? And also, is it possible to reconcile these differences, or is at least one side wrong?
Well, so the Catholic Church already incorporates theological differences. It hasn't mandated a single opinion on every issue. And it has traces of previous reunions, like the one that I mentioned in the episode you're talking about applies not just to Eastern non-Catholics and Catholics. It also applies between Eastern Catholics and Western Catholics. So here in the West, in the Catholic Church, it's common to understand that transubstantiation occurs at the point where the priest says the words of institution. This is my body and this is my blood. But in Eastern churches, like the Chaldean Rite, for example, and they're Catholics just like the rest of us, it's common to understand that transubstantiation occurs at an earlier point in the liturgy, at what's known as the epiclesis, which is where the priest calls down the Holy Spirit on the elements to transform them. And so that's for a while the Chaldean Church was not in communion with Rome, but then it came back into union. But this was regarded as something on which it's okay to have a difference of opinion. And so in the Chaldean Church today, they're fully Catholic, but they assume that transubstantiation occurs at the epiclesis, whereas Latin Catholics tend to assume that it occurs at the words of institution. We both agree it happens. It's just a question on when. So that's an illustration of how different opinions can coexist, even though churches are in a state of unity or restored unity. Well, we'd have to wait to have an actual reunification proposal on the table to see what the exact shape of it would be. But I can tell you what the lead-in thought is. This is a proposal that has been made by various churchmen, including Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger. What he proposed was that reunion could be established on the basis of we agree on everything that we agreed on prior to separation. So if in the first 1,000 years something was considered a within the legitimate diversity of opinion, that shouldn't stop us from being united today over that point. Now, you wouldn't want people in the East contradicting something that the Catholic Church had infallibly defined, especially in that first 1,000 years. But we would be able to accept situations in which they agree that both groups agree on whatever we agreed on prior to the separation. And so I would expect, given a variety of factors, but based on my read of the scene, I suspect that would be the most likely scenario under which reunification would be achieved. Now, there would be other things that would have to be dealt with as part of that process, but fundamentally, I think that whatever didn't split the church in its first 1,000 years likely would not be regarded as needing to split the church in the event of a future reunification. Now, there would be particular doctrines that would have to be clarified, and that are currently the subject of discussion. One of them is the filioque, but the idea that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. With that one, though, we already have a solution. The Catholic Church has no problem saying that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father through the Son. And early church fathers used that language, and in principle, Eastern Orthodox Christians don't have a problem with that formulation. And so as long as they're not excluded that reconciled understanding of this formula, then we don't need to be separated over it. So so that's one that we already sort of have a solution on. When it comes to the papacy, that's kind of another major one, but we're currently in dialogue about what is the exact role of the Pope and what would the Pope's role be in a reunited church. That's still being discussed, but the fundamental guideline that I suspect will play a large role, even and possibly a deciding role in a future reunification, would be what separated us before. If it didn't separate us before, doesn't need to separate us now.
That makes sense?
That does. Thank you.
All right, Rory, thank you. Thanks very much for the call from San Francisco. Hey, I want to just take a minute to share some good news with you. Our good friends over at Iowa Catholic Radio sent us a note today to say they've got a new station up and running, a big FM station, 89.9, up by Sioux City. So they got a whole bunch of communities listed here. You can probably find out all about it on iowacatholicradio.com. But they do a great job. We've always loved it when we got to visit there, broadcast from their studios, and that is great news. Another big, booming Catholic radio station for Iowa, and even into Minnesota it reaches. So congratulations to everybody at Iowa Catholic Radio. Jimmy Akin, our guest. Anthony in Chicago, Illinois. Next. Anthony, welcome. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, how you guys doing?
Very well, thank you.
I had a student actually ask me this the other day, and I couldn't think of a good answer off the top of my head. Why did God place the knowledge of the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden?
Is the question, why did God place the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden?
Yes, that's correct. It was
okay.
Part of like a two-parter where he had asked, did God intend to kind of like stump or trick Adam and Eve into eating of the tree since
No.
he knew putting it there? Yeah. And that's what I told him, but I couldn't think of the reason for why the tree was there to begin with.
Okay, so fundamentally, now the Catholic Church acknowledges that, and this goes back, for example, to Pope Pius XII's 1950 encyclical Humanae Generis. The Pope acknowledged, like biblical scholars do, that the first 11 chapters of Genesis are written in a different genre than later chapters and books in the Old Testament. So they, in Pope Pius's words, use language that is simple and metaphorical. They do pertain to history in a real way, he stressed, but they also use symbolic language. And if you look in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and if you also look in John Paul II's encyclical, the one on moral theology, I'm blanking on the name, from around 1992, 93.
Oh, I was going to say Fides et Ratio, but no, that's not it.
No. And if you look at his catechesis on the early chapters of Genesis, the tree is not understood to be a literal tree. It's not like Adam and Eve literally ate a piece of fruit and that caused a revolution in human knowledge and caused mankind to sin and caused mankind to fall into sin. Instead, the tree is seen as a symbol representing human choice, and specifically the choice of, are we going to follow God or not? So it's kind of a placeholder. God gave mankind moral law, and the question was, is man going to follow that law or not? And as it happened, man did not follow that law. And then that law is represented as, don't eat the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's a symbol that represents a fundamental choice that God gave man to either follow his law or not. And so really, if you abstract from the symbolism of the tree, what this is about is just the human exercise of free will. Will we use our free will to serve God, or will we use our free will to not serve God? And so how you can understand this is not that God planted a literal tree somewhere, but God gave man free will. That's really what's being symbolized here. He gave him the free will to either choose to love him and follow him, or the choice to not love him and not follow him. And that's really what God planted. He planted free will in us. That's the underlying truth behind this biblical text. So I don't think we should think of it as like it's not an arbitrary thing, like God literally planted a tree of some kind somewhere. It's not a trick. It's just a symbol of God gave us free will, and would we use that free will to love and serve him, or would we use that free will to not love and serve him?
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, that kind of fits in line with how I had answered some of his previous questions about that. I couldn't just remember, where from resource-wise that came from. So thank you. I'll definitely pass that along to him and see if he has any other good questions.
Thanks, Anthony.
Yeah. By the way, the document that I mentioned from John Paul II. It was his encyclical Veritatis Splendor. Also, and I'll give you my own interpretation of what the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is, because good and evil are two opposites that can be understood as embracing everything. They're like day and night. They embrace everything. And that's what's known in literature as a merism. A merism is like two opposites that embrace everything. And so I think the tree of the knowledge of good and evil means the tree of the knowledge of everything, that there was going to be a big upgrade in Adam and Eve's knowledge once they ate the tree. And that, I think, is presented as the temptation that causes them to misuse their free will.
Anthony, thank you. We will leave it there. On we go to Diane in Ohio. Hello, Diane. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
I want to know why when a boy baby is born in a day, there's a 30-day grace period where they don't get out. And when a girl baby was born, it was 60 days.
Okay, so it's a little hard to hear you, but I think I got the gist of your question. You're wanting to know why in the Bible did women have an extended purification period after the birth of a girl compared to the birth of a boy. So first of all, let's review what the rule was. The basic rule was that a woman would be unclean for 7 days, for a week, after giving birth to a boy, and for 14 days after a girl. And then after they had a purification rite, there was another purification period, which I'll tell you about on the other side of the break.
Hang on, Diane. We'll get you an answer after this. Jimmy Akin is our guest. It's Ask Me Anything on Catholic Answers Live, 888-318-7884. We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
Deepen your connection to the Church's holy days and seasons while you draw on the wisdom of the Church Fathers. Feasts of Our Fathers, the new book from Mike Aquilina and Adam Lucas, is a treasury of history, prayers, insights, and lessons that will bring you closer to the earliest of Catholic traditions. Take your prayer life and your solidarity with the Church, past and present, to a new level. Order your copy of Feasts of Our Fathers today at shop.catholic.com.
When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. A little bit of groovy music for you. Jimmy Akin here with us for both hours, and it's an Ask Me Anything. Diane in Ohio called to ask about the difference in the purification periods for a woman who gave birth to a girl as opposed to a boy in the ancient world. And Jimmy, you were in the midst of an answer.
Yeah, so I was explaining what the rule actually was, and the rule was that after the birth of a boy, a woman would be unclean for a week, and then she would ritually immerse herself, and then she would have another purification period that went on for 33 days. In the case of a girl, it was the same, except everything was doubled. So a woman, after giving birth to a girl, would be unclean for 2 weeks. Then she would ritually immerse herself and become clean. And then she would have another period of purification of 66 days. Now, what Diane was after was why this difference? And at least that's how she expressed it to the call screener. And the basic reason is that's just ancient Israelite culture. There is no special significance to it. It's just this is how the ancient Israelites did things. And there is no meaning ultimately to these purification periods. Scholars today will frequently refer to ceremonial uncleanliness, because a woman is not actually unclean after she gives birth. She doesn't remain. I mean, maybe she needs to be, cleaned up a little bit, but she can do that, or nurses can do that, or doctors or midwives can do that and get her physically cleaned up in just a few minutes after giving birth. This idea of having a further uncleanliness is part of the Jewish ceremonial system of cleanness and uncleanness, where, for example, they regarded pork as an unclean food. It's ceremonially unclean for Jews, but that doesn't mean it's physically dirty or contaminated. I mean, you could heat pork meat just like you could heat any other kind of meat and kill any microbes in it, so it wouldn't be physically dirty or physically contaminated. This is a ritual system of uncleanliness. And the same thing was true with childbirth and the discharges of other bodily fluids. If women had, their monthly discharge of blood, that would make them unclean. If men had a discharge of one of their bodily fluids, then that would make a man unclean. But all of this is just ceremony, and it doesn't say anything about the moral status of a person or even about the physical state of them as physically clean or unclean. It's just purely ceremonies.
Diane, I will leave that there. I hope that was helpful to you. It's time to welcome the man who still, amazingly, still has a job, Thomas, the TikTok engine. Hello, Thomas.
Hello, Cy, and thank you to I guess, the emergency order that kept TikTok around for 90 more days for keeping me employed, I
You can
suppose.
still work here.
I can still work here.
Well, did you bring us a question from TikTok for Jimmy? All right, that's what Thomas does. He brings us a question from TikTok, and he brings the answer back to TikTok and to all the other social media outlets so people can hear what the apologist had to say. Go ahead, Thomas.
That's right. Okay, Jimmy, this question was left under a previous video of yours in which you discussed Sola Scriptura, and someone said that Sola Scriptura is very defendable from Scripture. It was Jesus' primary gripe with the Pharisees. Almost every conversation he had with them was directly condemning any source other than Scripture.
So the first thing that's wrong with that is that it's wildly exaggerated. It is not the source of almost every conversation Jesus had with the Pharisees. In fact, it is precisely in one conversation that Jesus has with the Pharisees that he criticizes them for adhering to the traditions of men. That passage is found in Mark chapter 7, and it's paralleled in the other synoptic gospels, but it's really just one incident where that comes up. So it is not every conversation. The second problem is it doesn't prove sola scriptura. All it proves is that the traditions of the Pharisees were the traditions of men and were unreliable. It doesn't tell us anything about apostolic tradition. The traditions of the apostles were not the same as the traditions of the Pharisees. And Paul is explicit in telling us, for example, in 2 Thessalonians 2, that we need to adhere to all of the apostolic traditions we've received, whether they were delivered to us orally or in writing. And so this does not, sola scriptura actually is not defensible scripturally. This principle was not used in the apostolic age. Jesus did not use it. The apostles did not use it. And there are no passages in the New Testament that teach sola scriptura, meaning that it fails its own test and is self-refuting.
Thank you, Jimmy. That ought to do it on TikTok.
That should handle TikTok for now?
Yeah,
All right.
No comments under that video.
All right. Well, if it's still there, you're welcome back to do another question from TikTok, Thomas. The
Happy
TikTok
to come
engine.
back. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Thomas. Let's go to Lincoln, Nebraska. Ty is listening on Spirit Catholic Radio. Thank you for waiting, Ty. Go ahead with your question.
Hey, guys. Was wondering about the differences in the biblical canon between the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox churches. I know the EO have more books in their canon, so I was just wondering if there was ever a time in the early days when the churches had a unified canon or not.
Okay, so the basic answer is that in the early days, the canon was not yet wasn't yet fully developed, and so there was ambiguity about exactly what books belong to both the Old and the New Testament. My book, The Bible is a Catholic Book, tracks that history, and so maybe we can send Ty a copy, Cy, of The Bible is a Catholic Book.
Yes, let's do that.
But in the early Christian centuries, what Christians did was they typically relied on a translation of the Old Testament known as the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Old Testament. They relied on that because that is the translation that the New Testament authors quote 80 to 90% of the time when they quote the Old Testament. So the New Testament authors obviously had no problem with the Septuagint. And the Septuagint includes not only the books that are in the Protestant Old Testament today, it also includes some additional books like First and Second Maccabees and so forth. But there were different editions of the Septuagint, and they included slightly different books. And in the Catholic Church, many, but not all of these additional books that were found in various editions of the Septuagint were eventually recognized as scripture. In Orthodox communities, a slightly more expanded list tended to get recognized as scripture, but there never was a time when, like, all Christians had exactly the same books with no differences of opinion. There have always been differences of opinion in the Christian community regarding the precise canon of Scripture.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ty. Now, don't go anywhere because I'll put you on hold here. Edgar will pick up the line and we'll get an address. We'll send you. The Bible is a Catholic book, Jimmy Akin's book. Next, we can go to Glendora, California, where Ryan is watching on YouTube. Hello, Ryan. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hello, Jimmy. So I go to a school that is very anti-Catholic, and my Bible teacher is like always trying to like bash Catholicism. And one of the things that he said about the true presence of Christ in the Eucharist is that at the Last Supper, Jesus couldn't have instituted the Eucharist and given the apostles his true body and blood because Jesus is the perfect fulfillment of the Old Testament law, and that is why his sacrifice was, he never sinned and he never broke the Old Testament law, and that's why his sacrifice is good enough for God. And I was just kind of wondering, like, how he could do that, like, give them his body and blood without breaking the rules.
Okay, so based on what you said that your teacher said, he didn't really make an argument from the Bible itself as to why Jesus wouldn't be able to give the disciples his body and blood. The argument that you mentioned appealed to the fact that Jesus, perfectly fulfills the law and pleases the Father, but that doesn't connect it to the Eucharist. I suspect, and you tell me if he said this, I suspect what he might have had in mind and may have actually said is that Jesus couldn't give the disciples his body and blood because it was forbidden in the Jewish law to drink blood. Did he mention that?
Yeah, he did. He mentioned that like right after.
Okay. So there are a few things to point out in response to this. The first one is that's a Jewish ritual requirement. It's not actually wrong to consume blood. This was a Jewish ritual thing, just like we talked about in an earlier question about being ritually unclean. That was a ritual thing. It wasn't a moral thing. And in the same way, blood is just a different type of tissue in an animal. It's made out of certain cells, but because blood is essential to flow in blood, is essential in the animals people are familiar with to being alive, it came to symbolize life. And so blood is a symbol of the life. And since all life comes from God, ancient Israelites had the idea that, okay, the blood is the life of an animal, and so it belongs to God, so you humans don't eat it. Okay, so that's the symbolic value of the requirement for Jews not to eat blood. But the thing is, those laws were only ever binding on Jews. They were never binding on Gentiles. Then there's the fact that, well, if the life belongs to God, and if that's why you shouldn't drink an animal's blood, then, well, God could give you the permission to do that. If God says, hey, this belongs to me, don't you do this, he could then turn around and say, hey, this belongs to me, and now I'm giving it to you, which, in fact, he did with his own son. His son told people to eat my flesh and drink my blood. So that changes any previous requirement. And then there is another issue, which is that if it were intrinsically wrong to eat flesh and drink blood, then Jesus couldn't tell us to do it symbolically. Like, for example, adultery is wrong, and rape is wrong. Those are wrong things to do. They are immoral. And because they're intrinsically immoral, they're wrong in and of themselves to do, Jesus couldn't make those actions the basis of a Christian ritual, even symbolically. It would be like Jesus saying, okay, for this new ritual I'm setting up, I want people to symbolically commit adultery with each other, or I want people to symbolically rape each other. That makes no sense. If it's intrinsically wrong, you can't use it in a holy Christian ritual. And that tells us that eating Christ's flesh and drinking Christ's blood is not intrinsically wrong, because if it were, we couldn't do it even symbolically. And yet Jesus told us to do it. Whether you interpret that symbolically or literally, Jesus told us to do it, and that means it's okay. Then there's another point, which is your teacher may want to study some other branches of Christianity besides the one of the school he's in, because it's not just Catholics that believe in the real presence of Christ. The majority of Christians actually believe in the real presence of Christ. In addition to Catholics and Eastern Orthodox, you also have Anglicans who believe in the real presence. You have Lutherans who believe in the real presence. You have Methodists who believe in the real presence, and so forth. And so, all you got to do if you want a quick squelch to respond with is, hey, believing in the real presence was good enough for Martin Luther. It's good enough for me. And that will kind of presumably give him a little bit of reason to pause and rethink a little bit.
What do you think, Ryan?
Thank you.
Okay, very good. I think I'd like to send Ryan a book if he's facing these challenges, maybe a daily defense.
I was just going to suggest that one, yeah.
Okay, Ryan, if you are able to give us an address in Glendora, we will send you a copy of Jimmy's book, A Daily Defense, 365 Days Plus One to Becoming a Better Apologist. And call again. It was a great pleasure to get to speak with you. I got to take a break. We'll be right back with more Jimmy Akin, Ask Me Anything on Catholic Answers Live.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley, the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul, and that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come? At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
This is Jim Pinto, Director of EWTN Media Missionaries. Mother Angelica said, "The essence of evangelization is to tell everybody Jesus loves you." You can help EWTN share the good news by becoming a media missionary. Visit EWTNmissionaries.com today and join us in sharing the eternal word with the world.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Carrie gave me this to read. Let's see how I do. Do you know what happens this weekend? It's kind of sad. Something good is going away. And no, it's not the country named Greenland. Oh, really, Carrie? This weekend marks the end of our store-wide 25-25-25 sale. That's 25% off your purchase of $25 or more on just about everything we carry at shop.catholic.com. That's 2 25s. That's not 3 25s. Because here's the third 25.
2025.
Oh, thank you, Jimmy. Would have taken me weeks to get that. Just use promo code SAVE25 at checkout when you visit shop.catholic.com. All of Jimmy Akin's books, 25% off. Joe Heschmeyer, Trent Horn, Persuasive Pro-Life, Carla Broussard, and Tim Staples' books. New and notable, they're all on sale, 25% off. Use the promo code SAVE25 when you check out and you purchase more than $25 worth of books at shop.catholic.com. We're going to Michael in Buffalo, New York, watching on YouTube. Welcome, Michael.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call. And Jimmy, thank you so much for your channel, Mysterious World. I absolutely love your episodes.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I have a question. I was talking to a Protestant friend of mine and explaining that RCIA is now becoming OCIA. Mm-hmm. And he was pushing back about how complicated it is to be part of the Catholic Church, and said that, oh, you should just be able to get baptized and that's it. And he had said that this is not what the early church did. This is modern Catholicism. And I was kind of explaining the reason for it when you're to understand what you're being baptized into and being educated with the teachings of the church and to knowing Christ and his teachings. And he kept pushing back for me to show evidence of early, basically catechesis. And I was explaining the Baltimore Catechism, but he wanted earlier evidence. And could you explain that to me, how the process of entering the church was, years ago?
Sure. So what he's pointing to is that there is a difference between how Christian initiation ordinarily went in like the ministry of Jesus and immediately thereafter in the first century. And they tended not to have a lengthy period of instruction before you came in. One of the reasons for that was that the people who were initially converted to become Christian were Jewish, so they already knew the substance of the faith. They just needed to add on a little bit about, okay, so Jesus is the Messiah, and his death and resurrection saved us, and he instituted these rituals like baptism, and so we do them. And so they didn't need to have a lengthy period of instruction because they already had an identity as, okay, we worship God and so forth. And they already understood and knew about the Jewish God and the scriptures, and they already accepted all that. Then a few years after the ministry of Christ, Gentiles started to also come into the church. And some of them came in rather dramatic circumstances, like when Cornelius's family converts in Acts chapter 10, he's had an angel show up and tell him to convert. So he converts. He doesn't, it would be reason. And then he and his family all start speaking in tongues. It would be reasonable for Peter to say, okay, these are pretty strong signs. We ought to just let these people in and not make them wait. If an angel shows up and tells him to convert, and then if they're speaking in tongues, the Holy Spirit's clearly active in their lives. So, yeah, why do we need to wait? That's all pretty dramatic. And between the fact that that many people already knew the God of Israel because they were Jewish or because they came in dramatic circumstances, early Christians they didn't really think about how much instruction should a person have. If someone was willing to embrace the Christian faith, they went ahead and baptized them. But what they found with time was that there's some wisdom to making sure that a person understands and is settled on, yeah, I'm going to embrace the Christian faith. I'm going to be a Christian. Even Protestant churches today, typically you don't walk in and say, hey, why don't I get baptized right now? And they baptize you with no further instruction. That's kind of like what happened to the Ethiopian eunuch. He met Philip on the road. He gets a few minutes of instruction, and then he says, yeah, why don't I become Christian? And he gets baptized immediately. That's not the way it works in most Protestant churches. They want you typically to have at least some degree of additional instruction so that you understand the Christian faith that you're accepting. And that turned out to be wise. And it became clear that it was wise when the persecutions hit. Because one of the things they found out is that if someone had just made an impulsive decision to become a Christian and didn't really understand the faith, well, they might fall into heresy. You know, if they don't understand the faith, they may get screwy ideas and start preaching their screwy ideas and spreading heresies in the church. And they would tend to fall away in times of persecution. And so the early church began to perceive the wisdom of having a preparation period where you give the person instruction in the faith so they understand what they're embracing and they don't get heretical ideas and start spreading them, and making sure they're stable in their commitment to be a Christian, that they're not just going to fall away as soon as the Roman authorities start a persecution. And so even though it wasn't in the first century, it was in the second and the third and the fourth centuries where they had a lengthier period of preparation before coming into the church. And you can show that, for example, now this particular example is after the persecutions had ended, but not that long after. In the mid 300s, the Patriarch of Jerusalem was a guy named Cyril. So he's Cyril of Jerusalem. And what we have is his catechetical notes, because he would give catechetical lectures to the people that were looking at becoming Christian, and someone wrote them down. You know, they took dictation, they wrote down all of the things Cyril said, and they're really interesting to read because he's right here in Jerusalem. You know, this is where Jesus's ministry happened. And you can tell as he's talking, he's like gesturing, saying like, right over there is where Jesus did this, and right over here is where Jesus did that. He's also very practical. He, like in one of the early lectures, he's talking to the catechumens and saying, now I know some of you are here because you're curious, and some of you are here because there's a cute Christian girl that you want to be with, and that's okay for why you came here, but it's not enough to be a Christian. You need to be a sincere believer in Jesus. It's fine that you came here because of the cute Christian girl, but you need to sincerely believe in Jesus if you're going to be a Christian. And these lectures, you can tell just by the number of them, there are dozens, you can tell that they had a longer period of preparation. So by the early centuries, after the church had experience with heresy and experience with persecution, it was realized that it's good to have a longer period of preparation, and so that's what the church instituted. Also, in the first century, they assumed Jesus was coming back any day. Paul expected it in his lifetime in the beginning. It later became clear to him that wasn't going to happen. But if Jesus is coming back any day, you may as well do it now. Well, after it became clear that there was going to be a longer period before Jesus comes back, it just made sense in light of making sure people understood the faith and making sure that people had sincerely embraced it to have a longer period of preparation.
That get at what you were looking for, Michael?
It is. And I just have another quick one. At what time period did the catechesis process, like as we know it, start? Was this like a couple hundred years ago?
No, we've had catechesis. Like I just mentioned, Cyril of Jerusalem's catechetical lectures, they're from like the year 348.
Okay, so like the RCIA that we have now.
That's something that came about after the Second Vatican Council, but there was catechesis even before then. It wasn't called RCIA, but if you wanted to become a Catholic, in say the early 20th century, you'd have to take a period of instruction. They just didn't call it RCIA.
Michael, thank you very much for the question. Jimmy Akin is our guest. It's Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin today. And so I will say this, if you're on the line, hang on the line. We're going to come right back and get to your questions. If you haven't called yet, maybe a line or two open during the break, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. Jimmy Akins, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, and the man behind Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, Jimmy Akin Podcasts, and a bunch of other podcasts, including our podcast here. You can call him and ask him your question, 888-318-7884. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. One of the fun things about being here at Catholic Answers is that sometimes we get all kinds of wonderful guests. Well, let's put it this way. You never know who will turn up. And we have a bishop, the bishop of the Melkite Church here in the United States, Bishop Beyruti, is the Eparchy of Newton is the official name. That's correct.
Right,
well, thank you for coming in.
Oh, well,
Bishop.
thank you. It's a surprise visit, and thanks for allowing me on the show.
Well, now, do I say bishop or eparch?
Well, it's actually bishop. The official term is eparchial bishop, because the term that's used right now is an eparchy, but historically they use it as diocese, and our legal title is a diocese. So we kind of go back and forth between the two, but within the U.S. Conference of Bishops, they use the word eparchy for all the Eastern Catholic dioceses just to distinguish them from all the other dioceses.
Well, it is very gracious of you to come in and speak with us, but I think many people will say, what's a Melkite? Tell me what a Melkite is.
Well,
You're
great.
the bishop of the Melkite diocese here in the U.S., so what's a Melkite?
So if we think of when Jesus said, go into the whole world and make disciples of all the nations, well, the disciples actually did that, the end of Gospel of Matthew. And they went to some of the major cities within the Roman Empire, and one of them was Antioch. So in Acts chapter 11, it was in Antioch that the followers of Jesus were first called Christians.
Yeah.
So the churches that developed within the Levant, the area of the Middle East that we know of today, those were the native churches that developed with the rise of Christianity. So they're developed within Catholicism, 5 liturgical families. The largest in the West, Rome, was the Latin Rite. And then in the East, there are 4 liturgical families. There's the Byzantine family, the Armenian family, the Syriac family, and the Coptic family. So the Melkite Catholic Church is a church that is in full communion with Rome. Therefore, the word Catholic.
Yeah.
And we use the ancient liturgical tradition of the Byzantine family within the Catholic Church. So that's in brief. The word Melkite actually refers to it's a word meaning an emperor or a king. And since the emperors protected the churches from the time of Constantine, the ecumenical councils were held under the patronage or under the protection of the emperors. So when in the Council of Chalcedon, after the council was finished, those who rejected, so the Syriacs and the Copts, who rejected the council of, and others who rejected the Council of Chalcedon, called those who accepted them the Melkos, because they said, you are loyalists to the emperor.
Ah.
But those who accepted it said, actually, we're loyal to the ecumenical council. Yes, we're loyal to the ecumenical council. And we're grateful for the emperor for protecting the churches and allowing us to convene. So today, initially that term referred to everyone who accepted the Council of Chalcedon. Today, it refers specifically to the Catholics who use the Byzantine liturgical tradition that are rooted from the See of Antioch.
Now, you say Antioch, I think Turkey. Is that right?
Today it's Turkey,
yeah.
But it was part of Syria before that.
But your last name is Beyruti.
Beyruti.
That makes me think not Turkish.
No, I'm
Lebanese.
Yeah, so there are within the Eastern churches, there is not only a religious element, there is also a political element of the changes of boundaries and countries throughout that area for a long period of time. So yes, I was born in Lebanon and I was raised in Vancouver. I studied in Ottawa, and for the last 12 years of my life, I've been in the U.S. I served as a pastor in Orange County, California, and 2 years ago I was asked to be the bishop of the Melkite Diocese or Eparchy in the U.S. We have 50 parishes across the country.
One here in San Diego.
One in San Diego, and one in Orange County, Temecula, San Bernardino, and then our largest one on the West Coast is our cathedral in North Hollywood. So our Melkite Catholic Church is rooted, of course, in the Middle East and in the early proclamation of the good news of the gospel. But in North America, we have parishioners and members of the Melkite Church who are of Middle Eastern ancestry, but we also celebrate the liturgy in English and in Spanish in some places, and we are a church that's open to all. And in general, in most places, there is a predominance of the English language, so that those who love the Byzantine liturgy feel they want a Catholic liturgy, but within the Byzantine liturgical tradition, and also are close to our parishes or just experience the love and joy and hospitality of our parish can be part of. So in addition to those of a Middle Eastern background like myself, our church is open to anyone who wants to come and pray. And this is the the thing that sometimes Catholics don't know, if somebody is a Catholic, baptized Catholic, practicing Catholic, and is prepared to receive the Eucharist, they are welcome into a Melkite Catholic Church to attend the Divine Liturgy, which fulfills their Sunday obligation, and also they are permitted to receive communion. And if it's a Roman Catholic priest is permitted to celebrate
with you.
And ironically, this is what the word Catholic means.
That's not ironic. That is literally what
that is literally what the word means, because sometimes we say, are you really Catholic? Well, if it wasn't for the Eastern churches, well, it's the kata alone can't be fully in the fullness of itself. So.
How about I have a question and a request for you?
Absolutely.
When you bless yourself, do you do it the right way or do you do it backwards like us?
We always do it the right way, unlike the... So tell me for picking up on that nuance. It's to say, why do you do it that way?
We have a Byzantine priest here who always tells me, I could do it backwards like you if you want me to.
Yes, exactly. So there's an entire history of the sign of the cross, but to make it brief, to fast forward to today, in the Byzantine tradition and the Melkite Catholic Church, we make the sign of the cross with 3 fingers representing the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Okay.
So the 3 fingers together. Mm-hmm. So 3, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, not separate gods, one God.
Okay.
And then Jesus Christ is fully God and fully man.
Oh, so those two are the
two come together.
Hypostatic union.
There you go. So you have the theology, full theology,
Look
right?
at that.
Right
Wow.
in the palm of your hand, as
Yeah,
they
but
say.
then when you...
And then you go from the top,
Yeah.
from the forehead, close to the bottom, as close to your... I tell people to make the big sign of the cross because it's very important for us Catholics to know that we believe in the cross.
Okay.
We don't believe in the sign of the circle, and we don't believe in the sign of the zigzag. We see that all the time. So I tell people, make purposeful sign of the cross from the top as far down as you can go around your belly button, and then you go to your far right, and then you go to your far left.
All right. Well, here's the request then.
Yes.
Could you, in whatever language that you want, could you give us and our listeners a blessing?
I sure can. We can do it in Arabic, and the blessing of both the priest and the bishop. And before that, I'll tell you how I will give you a blessing, because there's also a special hand gesture with the sign of the cross. We put 2 fingers up. We reverse it, so that's Jesus' humanity and divinity. But then we put 3 fingers down for the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And in addition to that, this way of making the shape of the hand for the blessing also forms an I, a C, an X, and a C, which is Jesus Christ, Jesus Christos, which is the inscription that you will see on all the icons. So when a priest blesses or a bishop blesses, he's not blessing with his own charism or gifts, he's blessing with the blessing of Jesus Christ. So we will say the prayer now in Arabic. Ila Rabbi natlub, Ya Rab urham, barakatul Rabb wa rahmatu tahullan alaykum bi ni'mati wa mahabbati lil bashar, kulla heen al-ana wa kulla awanin wa ila dahri al-dahirin. Amen.
Thank you.
And blessings to you and your staff and your
Bishop.
ministry that goes around the whole world.
Well,
I appreciate it.
Thank you for giving us a real full Catholic flavor today.
Perfect.
I appreciate
Great.
that, Bishop. Thank you very much. Bishop Beirudi from the Newton Diocese here in the United States. Thank you, Bishop. All right, back to phones we go. I'll tell you about, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back right after this. Jimmy Akin is our guest. It's Ask Me Anything on Catholic Answers Live.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at magnificat.com.
As the largest religious media network in the world, EWTN has an important role in educating others about our Catholic faith and spreading the good news of salvation. We invite you to explore our numerous pages of historical faith documents, prayers, teachings, and other current issues in Catholicism today. Visit EWTN.com and click Catholicism. EWTN is the global Catholic network.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. All the lines full, so back to the phones we go. Jimmy Akin, our guest. It's Ask Me Anything on Catholic Answers Live. Yes?
You know, one of the things I liked about what the bishop said is we don't believe in the sign of the circle or the sign of the zigzag. One of the old Universal horror mummy movies, it's like the next to last one. I think it's The Mummy's Tomb, but it's set in a swamp in Louisiana. And so they have all these actors in Hollywood who are playing Cajuns.
Oh, yeah.
But they're not really Cajuns.
Yeah.
And so they don't really know Catholic customs. And there is this one Cajun, when a woman is killed by the mummy, he's going to make the sign of the cross, and he touches his forehead, and he touches his right shoulder, and he touches his left shoulder, and he touches his stomach. And it's like, okay, that's the sign of the lightning bolt. That is not the sign of the cross.
That's the Flash, man. That's not Jesus. Yeah. All right, let's go to Alex in Woodland Hills, California, watching on YouTube. Welcome, Alex. Go ahead with your question.
Hello there. First of all, big fan here, Jimmy. So I'm happy to be here. My question is, it deals with prayer, and I hear this a lot in my parish I go to, and I'm Catholic, by the way. And that is, when you pray, be specific in your prayer as much as possible. And typically in the past I would do that, but I would find I'd get let down a lot. Like, for example, when I would say my rosary, let's say I'm in the second sorrowful mystery, I would say, the scourging at the pillar. Right there, I would insert my prayer request. Like, okay, Mary, pray that I get that job interview I just went on Tuesday. But I found a lot of my prayer requests that I don't get answered. Now, I do take as allowance that it has to be God's timing. Where are you at with your soul when you make your prayer request? Because, there's falls on deaf ears if you're a sinner. But if you're St. James chapter 5, if you're righteous, then God answers your prayer. But I'm saying, assuming all boxes are checked off, right? You go to confession, you're clean slate, you're good. Does it matter? Like, in other words, if I don't be specific in my prayer request, is God, and I'm assuming, let's say your prayer request is in line with God's will, but you don't be specific, does that mean God is not going to answer it, again, because you're not specific? I guess kind of that's really what my big question lies.
Okay, well, let's throw this question over to Cy Kellett and see what he can tell us. So, Cy, we've got the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah.
Did Jesus tell us to say things like, Our Father who art in heaven, your will be done by causing me to get a job on earth as it is in heaven?
That does not have the ring of familiarity to me.
give us this day our daily pepperoni pizza, or things like that. Did he say things like that?
That is not ringing a bell, Jimmy.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm glad.
Yeah. So it seems to me that there is no mandate spiritually to have any particular degree of specificity. Now, if you have something that you're particularly concerned about, well, of course you can be specific about it. That's fine. But it's also okay to leave things up to God. St. Paul talks about how at times we don't know what we need to pray. We know we need to pray, but we don't know what we need to pray for. And it's okay to leave that up to God. And the Holy Spirit knows what we need. And so we can leave it to the Holy Spirit to intercede for us. So I would say, rather than worrying about am I being too specific or not specific enough, we just need to trust God. If there's something that that's specific that we're particularly concerned about, it's fine to ask for that. But it's also it's fine to be more general and say, your will be done, or give us this day our daily bread, or, please help me with whatever I need most, whatever that is. You know it better than me, Lord, because prayer is not about giving God information. As Jesus points out in the Sermon on the Mount, he already knows what we need before we ask. So he's omniscient. This is not about giving God information. This is about our relationship with God. What prayer does is it helps us be aware of our dependence on God. It helps us think about God. It helps us love God. It helps us learn to conform our will to God's will. It does all of those things to build our relationship with God, and they're all good. And so we shouldn't try to make it seem like there's just one way to pray and you need to pray exactly in the right way to get what you want. No. It's not like that. This is more relationship. And our relationship with God is like that of a child who can trust the parent. If there's something the child knows that they really want or really need, they can tell their parent specifically. But if they can also trust their parent to give them what they need, even if the child doesn't know how to be specific about it. So rather than being scrupulous, I would say just, trust God and do what comes natural.
Okay, Alex?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I've been keeping it general lately. I just had a horrible batting average. Like every time I was specific, I would even cry. Like, for example, pray that my dog lives. He died of parvo. He wasn't supposed to live. Anyway, so I believe with the Lord's Prayer, you have everything in there. The body of words like "Give us this day our daily bread" is enough to furnish us what God, wants. So I do that. But I hear mixed things, like, you're not being specific enough. But listen, after I talked to you, you kind of reconfirmed already what I suspect is, and that is God will – I don't feel that God's going to hold out a blessing, even if it's something that he wills for you and you want that. In other words, it lines up together, but you're not specific. I don't think it's going to hold out on that. But I just wanted to call and ask you guys. But I appreciate it. Thank you.
The danger of thinking you got to say specific words is the danger of magical thinking. And it's a parallel to what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, that the pagans pray with long prayers because they think that God needs them. And he makes the point, no, God doesn't need that. And in the same way, you don't have to get into detail. Just like pagans don't need to go long with their words, we don't need to go into detail. Now, if you want to go into detail, that's great. But you don't have to. It's not like there's a magical set of words that if you say the right words, it's like a spell, and you say the right words and instantly God responds. This is about a relationship. This is not about casting magic spells.
Alex, wonderful question. Thank you very much for the call and the conversation. I'm heading off to Fort Wayne, Indiana now. Elizabeth is in Fort Wayne. Elizabeth, thank you for waiting. Go ahead with your question.
Hello. So my question is, how might we discern the difference between, say, like a demonic manifestation of some sort and perhaps a soul from purgatory requesting assistance? Like, what would be signs that it's one or the other, and how should we approach a situation where we're not sure?
Okay, well, so the basic rule is interpret experiences as they present themselves. Now, that's not a guarantee that you've got the right interpretation, but that's the starting point. You don't want to be systematically suspicious of experiences. You want to interpret them as they appear. So if something acts like a demon, we'll assume it's a demon. If it acts like a soul in purgatory, assume it's a soul in purgatory. So what do we know about what demons do? Well, they possess people. So if its spirit is possessing someone, then that would be a sign it's a demon. Now, it doesn't prove it's a sign that it's a demon. There are situations in which what seems to be a soul in purgatory might manifest through a living human being. That's possible, but it's not the norm. So if I saw someone who was possessed by a spirit, I would say that's probably a demon. Assuming there's not a natural cause like mental illness or something like that. If I know that this is something apart from nature, something that's preternatural, and it involves a possession, I'm going to assume it's a demon until I get proof otherwise. On the other hand, if I'm in a location and a spirit manifests not possessing someone, but maybe it's moaning, or maybe it's standing there asking for my prayer or my forgiveness, which are actually common themes in what are known as after-death communications or ADCs, well, I'm going to assume it's a human spirit who wants my prayer, and then I'll pray for it. So that's kind of the answer to your first question. The answer to the second question, what do you do if you're not sure? Well, you can always do more investigation. And as part of that investigation, you can ask questions. St. John in 1 John 4, he says, test the spirits. to find out whether they're of God or not? Well, if you're going to test them, you got to talk to them. He doesn't say, John doesn't say, when you encounter a spirit, stick your fingers in your ears and go la, 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 and refuse to have anything to do with it. He says, test it. And so you can ask questions like, who are you? What do you want? And then you can incorporate the information you get back into your answer. Very often, after-death communications are of people we know, someone we know who has died. And so if someone if I know someone who's died and then they appear to me and say, please forgive me or please pray for me, well, then I'm going to do those things. Now, it doesn't prove they're not a demon, but I don't have evidence of it being a demon. I have evidence of it being a soul of someone I knew who is still undergoing purification. That's what the evidence points to. And you always go with the evidence you've got. You may get more evidence, at which point you can revise your interpretation, but you always go with the evidence you've got. Suppose I am suffering from an information deficit, though. Suppose I can detect that there is something paranormal going on here, but the phone line is not a strong one. I'm not getting a lot of information. Even when I ask questions, they don't respond, or maybe they make a gesture, but it's hard to interpret what does that gesture mean. Well, what do I do in that case? Well, I would suppose that it's probably a human soul, because human souls are more common in encounters than demons are. In preternatural encounters, ghosts are more common than demons. Also, demons are actually demonic manifestations are quite rare, whereas human souls manifest into the living those are quite common. In fact, about 40% of the population reports having an ADC, or an after-death communication with a loved one, at least once in their life. So that's very common. Also, demons are more powerful than humans. And so if it's like this spirit is having trouble getting its message through, it's probably a human, because demons would be powerful enough to get the message through. And then finally, if I just can't make a decision about what it probably is, well, then I'll leave that open. And I'll say, God, if this is a human spirit, please help it. If it's a demon, please drive it away. And I might even get out some holy water and sprinkle the area and say, God, if this is a demon I'm dealing with, may the holy water drive it away. But if it's a human spirit I'm dealing with, may the holy water give it blessings, and leave it up to God.
All right, and I'm going to leave that there, because we're very full with calls, and we've got lots more folks to get to. So, Elizabeth, thank you very much for the call. Going to Janet in Seattle, who's been waiting a very long time. Janet, thank you for your patience. Go ahead with your question.
Yes, please. I have a friend, and she says that the first Bible came from Ethiopia, and I want to know, why does she think that?
Well, you'd have to ask her. I couldn't really tell you why she'd think that, because the Bible, if you think about it as a single book, originally, the Bible was not a single book. It was a collection of books. That's why we talk about the book of Genesis, or the book of Psalms, or the book of Matthew. Those are all individual books. And originally they were scrolls. But then later, after the Christian age started, people started making collections of different scriptural books, and they'd put them together under the same cover with a square spine, what's known as a codex. That's the modern form of a book. It's different than a scroll where you roll up the pages. And so you started getting collections of biblical books, but the earliest collections, we don't have one that's the earliest. We have a variety of collections. We have fragments of them. Some of them date to early centuries. The earliest Bibles that are sort of complete are from the 300s, from the mid 300s, and they are not in Ethiopic. The liturgical language in Ethiopia is Ge'ez, and the earliest collected books of scripture that we have are not in Ge'ez. The major manuscripts that we have, the earliest ones like Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus, they're in Greek. And then later we have some Latin ones, and eventually we have some Ethiopian ones. But if she says that she thinks the first Bible was in Ethiopic, or it's from Ethiopia, I'd say, okay, what's your evidence for that? And let's look at it together as compared to, you can look up Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus online and learn about them.
Okay, Janet?
Okay, thank you.
Well, Janet, since this is a Bible question, I'd like to send you Jimmy's book, The Bible is a Catholic Book. And especially because you held on that line for a long time. If you will hold just a minute more, Edgar will come on, get an address, and we'll send you Jimmy Akin's book, The Bible is a Catholic Book. It is time for us to take a quick break. If you're on the line, just hang on the line. One line open right now, soon to be two, I think, 888-318-7884. Have you ever wondered about the mysterious, even obscure aspects of the Catholic faith? Dive into the Jimmy Akin podcast, where Jimmy brings together information from many fields as he pushes the boundaries of apologetics. Tune in today to the Jimmy Akin podcast, Mysteries of the Faith, a highly entertaining, informative, and at times humorous show that will help you grow in your faith. Visit JimmyAkinPodcast.com today to subscribe.
Lots of people have big questions about Catholicism. It needs a big book of answers, and now it's got one. The Big Book of Catholic Answers is filled with helpful replies to more than 250 questions about the faith. Questions about God, salvation history, the Creed, the Bible, the list goes on and on. Order your copy of the Big Book of Catholic Answers today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron. Why am I feeling so groovy all of a sudden? Oh, it's the groovy music. A little bit of groovy music for you. Jimmy Akin, our guest. I am Cy Kellett, your host, and every line full. So it is back to work we go. We go to Sarah in St. Louis, Missouri, listening on 96.7 FM. Sarah, we're glad you're here. Go ahead with your question.
Hi. So I'm kind of on my journey of creating a relationship with God and understanding like all his qualities. So my question is, if God is all-knowing and knows what we're going to choose, how we're going to choose to live our lives, then do we really have free will? So if he knows like every choice we're going to make when he creates us, even our sins, and decides to make us regardless, then to me that means everything is kind of predetermined. So in my logic, either we have free will or God is all-knowing. So what are your thoughts on this? And then I might have a follow-up question too, depending on your answer.
Okay, so this is a common question that a lot of people wonder about. But let's throw this one over to Cy Kellett and see what he has to say. So Cy Kellett.
How am I getting? All right, go ahead.
Let's consider whether knowledge first. Yes. Let's consider whether knowledge causes things to be determined. So I can see you right now via the magic of video cameras. I can see that right now you are wearing a blue shirt.
Yes.
Now, some of the people listening on the radio can't see that, but I can. So I know Cy Kellett is wearing a blue shirt.
Yes.
Did I predetermine that Cy Kellett, did I force him to wear that blue shirt, or did he choose to wear the blue shirt by his own free will? Cy Kellett, what do you say? Did I manipulate you, or did you pick the blue shirt by your own free will today?
You did not manipulate me. It was the only clean shirt I had this morning.
Okay, but you could have worn a dirty one if you chose.
Yes. It was predetermined
Okay.
by my laziness.
Okay, so it was your own. Hang on, Sarah. So that shows us that mere knowledge of something does not deprive people of free will. Now let's apply that to the future. So let's suppose it's yesterday, and it's not Friday, January 24th. It's Thursday, January 23rd. And I happen to be fortunate in that I have a time machine. I have my TARDIS. And so I get in my TARDIS, I get in my time machine, and I go forward to today. And then I look at Cy Kellett and see he's wearing a blue shirt. And then I go back to Thursday, January 23rd. So it's now Thursday, January 23rd again. And I know that tomorrow Cy Kellett is going to wear a blue shirt. So I foreknow the fact that he's going to wear a blue shirt tomorrow. Cy Kellett, did by hopping in my TARDIS and seeing what you would choose to wear tomorrow, did I deprive you of free will?
You did not.
No, you made that decision all on your own. I just happened to know about it. And in the same way, now God doesn't have a time machine because he doesn't need one. God is outside of time. And so God sees all of human history all at once. Everything, everywhere, all at once, like that Michelle Yeoh movie. And so God just sees what people choose to do in time. And that's what we really mean when we talk about God foreknowing something. From his perspective, outside of time, it's not really foreknowing. St. Augustine talks about this. He's just seeing the world and seeing what happens in it. And in his eternal now, because time does not pass for God, God sees the past, the present, and the future. It's all the same to him. He sees it all. But from our perspective inside of time, if I'm on January 23rd, God could give me a divine revelation and say, Jimmy, tomorrow Cy Kellett will wear a blue shirt. And then I would have foreknowledge because I am in time. For me, I have knowledge before Cy actually wears the blue shirt. And so to us inside of time, God's eternal knowing of the world looks like foreknowledge, but it's just knowledge from God's perspective. And so consequently, his knowledge does not determine what's going to happen any more than any other kind of knowledge. If I get in my time machine and I see what Cy's wearing tomorrow, that doesn't determine what Cy wears. I just know it. And in the same way, if God in his eternal now sees what's happening on a particular day in history, he just knows it. That doesn't determine what happens. And so philosophers who think carefully about these matters have generally concluded that merely having knowledge of a future situation does not force that situation to occur. It occurs or does not occur based on other factors like free will, but you can know the outcome of what someone freely chooses without forcing them to make that choice.
All right, let's go back to you, Sarah. What do you think?
Okay, so I get that. I somewhat understand that.
You may need to sit with it for a while longer.
Yeah, so if God is creating a person, a soul to put on earth, and he already knows the choices they're going to make. He knows they're going to commit a sin. Say he's going to create a murderer on somebody that murders somebody, and he knows that that person isn't going to repent and will ultimately go to hell for that sin, but he still decides to create that person anyways. He's not causing them to murder that person, but
correct.
At the end of the day, he could have chose to just not make that murderer altogether.
Well, no, not necessarily. You're presupposing not just that God knows what does happen, what people actually choose. You're supposing that God knows what people would do in particular circumstances, even if they're never put in those circumstances. So you're proposing that, let's suppose God contemplates making a guy named John, and in his eternal now, in order to say, well, God could have refrained from creating John if he knew John was going to commit a murder, then you'd have to say that God knows what John would do if he's created. But then God could refrain from creating him if he sees John is going to misuse his free will. This is a form of knowledge called middle knowledge. And a lot of people assume that God has middle knowledge, but this was not the classical Christian assumption. The classical Christian assumption is that God has knowledge of all possible worlds and of the actual world. But it was not the Christian assumption that God knows what people would do freely if they were in situations that they're never actually put in. Unfortunately, we're getting into an area that would require me to take some extra time to explain, and we have some additional calls we want to get to. So what I'd like to do is recommend that you go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy Akin, and you want to look up an episode of the Jimmy Akin podcast. So you go to youtube.com/Jimmy Akin, and you just you hit the magnifying glass to do a search, hit the magnifying glass icon, and search on why would God create a person knowing he's going to go to hell? And I have a whole video of the Jimmy Akin podcast. It's actually episode 5 of the Jimmy Akin podcast, where I talk about this issue, and I explain it in a great deal of depth, and I have illustrations to make the concepts easier. And so I would suggest checking out episode 5 of the Jimmy Akin podcast, Why Would God Create Someone He Knows Is Going to Go to Hell?
And I will leave it there. Thanks very much. As I said, lots of folks on the line, so on we go. And Madison is in Michigan watching on YouTube. Welcome, Madison. Go ahead with your question.
Hi, thank you so much for taking my call.
We're happy to have you.
Yes. So I have a very specific potential objection that someone could make. I've never heard of this before, but I think it's pretty reasonable. So, of course, Catholic tradition teaches that Mary experienced a painless childbirth when she gave birth to Jesus, which I, of course, believe to be true. But to me, it seems to be kind of a lazy argument to say that Mary had a painless childbirth as a result of her sinlessness. Obviously, we know this idea comes from Genesis 3, when God says that pain in childbirth is a consequence of sin. So it initially
not quite what he said, but okay.
Since Mary was without original and personal sin, that she wouldn't be subject to pain in childbirth. But it seems this is inconsistent, since both Jesus and potentially Mary, the only perfect human beings in the world, experienced bodily death. And I know there's the possibility of Blessed Mother, her Dormition, that maybe she didn't experience bodily death, but we know at the very least that Jesus did experience bodily death, since Romans 6:23 says that the wages of sin is death, implying that a bodily death is a consequence of sin, similar to how in
Madison, we're going to have to take a break soon, and I'm not sure what your question for me is. Could you put this in the form of a question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So how can we claim that Mary's lack of sin was what led to a painless childbirth if Jesus, who was completely perfect in every way, suffered and died a bodily death?
Okay. Well, I would say that there are several assumptions that are being made in the way if a person asks that question, and I understand you're asking it hypothetically, but if someone actually asks that question for real, they're making several assumptions that are not necessarily guaranteed. The first assumption is that Genesis 3 teaches us that there would have been no pains of childbirth if Adam and Eve had not fallen. That is not actually what the text of Genesis says. What God tells Eve is, I will multiply your pains in childbirth. And taken at face value, that's open to the possibility that Eve and other women would have had pains in childbirth. They were just not as strong as they came to be after the fall. So one could propose that Mary did or would have had a painful childbirth, because it just wouldn't have been as painful. So that's one assumption that's being made. A second assumption that's being made is that 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 the fall would not have impacted the condition in which Mary lived. One of the things that's clear, using Jesus as a parallel, is that he was he lived in a non-paradisical state. And so he wasn't like living in paradise like Adam and Eve did. And as a result, even though he had absolutely no sin, original or personal, he still had to deal with suffering in this life in a post-fall world. And so you could say, well, okay, Mary might not have had original or personal sin either, but she's still living in a non-paradisical environment in a post-fall world, and that could be what's responsible for the sufferings of pain in childbirth. Maybe the reason, even if you say there wouldn't have been pains had mankind not fallen, maybe the reason was that God would have done a special miracle for all unfallen women to keep them from having pains in childbirth. But now that we're in a fallen state, in a non-paradisical state, maybe God's just not performing that miracle. And so if Mary is now living in a non-paradise environment, maybe God is not going to perform that miracle. And so she would have a painful childbirth for that reason. The third assumption is that God didn't do a special miracle in Mary's case. Now, we have startlingly early evidence that Mary had a painless childbirth, that we can trace that back to the year AD 67 at least. So we have very early evidence for Mary not having a painful childbirth, but maybe that's because God did a special miracle in her case. I mean, the earliest source we have about Jesus's birth and what it was like says that there was a bright light and all of a sudden Mary's holding a little baby and her womb is as it was before. Well, that's a miraculous birth by definition. So if God chose to do a miracle for Mary in giving birth to Jesus, then that's a separate miracle that has nothing to do with the fall. It has to do with the fact Jesus is the Son of God. It doesn't have to do with the fall. So you could say Mary would have had a painful childbirth as a result of either the fact that there would have been pain before the fall or that the state of the world has changed. But God just did a special miracle to relieve Mary from having that. Then, as you say, at the other end of her life, the majority opinion is that Mary did die, but Jesus definitely died, and that obviously doesn't conflict with the idea of original sin, because Jesus did not have original sin or personal sin, and yet he still was killable. He still died. And so if you can say the Son of God can die in a non-paradisical, pre-glorified state, well, then Mary could also die in a non-glorified, in a non-paradisical, pre-glorified state, the same way her son did. And the issue of original sin doesn't engage that, because Jesus's death was not a product of original sin. It was a product of the fact he was not in paradise and was not yet glorified. And in the same way, Mary's death would not be a product of original sin. It would be a product of the fact that she was in a non-paradisical state and had not yet been glorified. So there are a bunch of assumptions that are built into the question, none of which are guaranteed. And so there are multiple different avenues by which these two things can be harmonized.
Madison, got to leave it there because I got to take a break. Right back with more Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and his gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
Proclaiming the faith, changing lives.
The year was 2000. EWTN's coverage of the Jubilee year includes Pope John Paul II opening the Jubilee door, his trip to the Holy Land, the canonization of St. Faustina in Rome, and the beatification of Jacinta and Francisco Marto in Fatima, Portugal.
To learn more about Mother Angelica's life and the history of EWTN, visit EWTN.com/Mother Angelica.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Time flying. Jimmy Akin, our guest. It's Ask Me Anything. Still lots of folks on the phone. So let's go to Wayne in Middletown, Ohio. Welcome, Wayne. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, how you fellas doing? My question is it a necessity to have the priest bless sacramentals, i.e. a crucifix, saint medal, anything in that nature?
No, and for two reasons. The first reason is there are some blessings that laity are empowered to perform. The church has a book of blessings, and in a fit of creative name and genius, they decided to call it the Book of Blessings. And if you read the Book of Blessings, it has all these different blessings for different things, and the laity are able to do some of them. Like the Blessing of Throats on St. Blaise's Day, laity can do that. On the other hand, there are some blessings that are reserved for priests or at least deacons, but there's no requirement that you have those done. If you have a crucifix or a rosary or an icon, you know, that you could have blessed, well, it's fine and good to have it blessed, but it's not mandatory. There's no law anywhere that says you must get these items blessed. You can still use them as devotional aids to manifest your faith in God and grow closer to God and his saints. So it's up to you if you want them blessed or not.
Okay, Wayne?
Oh, that answered my question.
Good.
But, I'm a candidate in OCIA, so I want to make sure I get some things in order, so I don't go and harass my local pastor for blessings that aren't necessary.
Well, Wayne,
they're not necessary, but they're fine to do them. I mean, so I wouldn't worry if you have some things you'd like to get blessed. You know, just take them to the priest and say, "Hey, I'd like to have these blessed. Could you do that for me?"
And Wayne, I'll tell you what I'd like to do for you is, and first of all, congratulations on approaching entry into the Catholic Church. I'd also like to send you Jimmy's book, The Words of Eternal Life, True Happiness and Where to Find It. I hope you will find it helpful as you process towards Easter. And on we go, because just a few minutes left and still folks on the line. Lewis is in Omaha, Nebraska, watching on YouTube. Hello, Lewis. You got a question for Jimmy?
Hello, Si. Hello, Jimmy. I got two questions and a thank you for Jimmy. First question, what is the official language of the church?
Well, let's do them one at a time. Hang on. We don't want to confuse anybody. What is the official language of the church?
There isn't one. Now, you'll sometimes hear people say, oh, Latin is the official language of the Catholic Church. No, Latin is the official language of the Latin Church, but the Catholic Church is broader than the Latin Church.
Sorry, that's what I meant.
Even then, Latin is only used for certain purposes in the Latin Church. Other languages are used for other purposes. So it's not like there's one official language. The church recognizes a diversity of languages and it issues official documents in multiple different languages. In some cases, they're based on a Latin version, but in other cases, they're not. So that's the answer to your first question. What's your second question?
Second question, can you describe the process used in the first century, how a man and a woman get married?
Oh, yeah.
I understand that Joe Heschmeyer has a video that goes into quite detail. Lewis,
I haven't seen Joe's video, so I can't comment on it. But if you want a basic description, my understanding is that the typical way that marriage was contracted was at a certain point, an arrangement would be made between two families typically, and this involved acquiring the consent of whoever the parents were, and especially the father of the woman, to be married off, because she's going to be leaving her father's household and joining her husband's household. So you needed to get the consent of the head of her household, which would be her father typically. And in order to compensate him for the loss of his daughter, typically the husband would pay what's known as the mohar. The mohar, or to translate it into English, the bride price, was a sum of money that was paid to the father of the bride typically. And once the mohar was paid, the couple would be considered to be engaged or even legally married, such that it would require a legal procedure like a divorce to separate that. But even though the couple are now legally married, they don't yet start living together immediately. What would happen instead is the husband would go back to his household and he would prepare a place for him and his wife to live. It might be in the same house, it might be in a different house, but he would go off and during this lengthier, extended period after they're already legally married, and prepare a place for them, prepare a home for them. And this process could take up to a year. But then once everything's ready, they would have what's sometimes called the fetching of the bride ceremony. And so the husband would, with his friends and other members from the village, other people from the village, would approach the bride's home, and they would then escort her back to the husband's home. And once they reach the husband's home, they throw a big party. And everybody in town, who knows them and is friends with them, they celebrate. Most of them get drunk, and they eat lots of food, as much as they can afford. And while all the big partying is going on, the bride and the groom sneak off into the back room and consummate the marriage. And so now they're not only legally married, but they have a consummated marriage as well. And after that, they settle into normal life as married members of the community.
You know what? Does that? You said you had a thank you too. So, Louis, let me let you do the thank you. Did you want to do that?
Thank you for coming to Omaha, Jimmy.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. I look forward to being there.
I'll tell you what. Louis. Thank you very much. We're so close to the end. I'm just going to read Rick in Lancaster, New York's question. At what era did the church rule that priests could not be married?
Okay, well, this discipline actually goes all the way back to the New Testament, because Jesus himself was celibate, meaning not married, and Paul was celibate. So we have celibate priests and Jesus himself in the first century. After that, it went in and out of favor in different historical periods, but the major shift was during the reign of Pope Gregory VII in the 1000s. He lived in the 11th century. He reigned between 1073 and 1085, and he issued a mandate for at least the Latin clergy to be celibate, and that's kind of really when clerical celibacy in the West took hold.
And was it because they didn't want wives and children to be beneficiaries?
Well, no. The principal reason is that it would allow priests to conform their lives to Christ's mode of life, so there's greater holiness, and it would free them up for additional ministry to other people. And it would help the priesthood not become a hereditary caste system. So, but the principal reason was this is the way Jesus lived, and if you want to be a priest of Jesus, it's a good thing, not a mandatory thing, but it's a good thing to have the same mode of life he did, which is also going to be the same mode we're all going to end up with in the next life.
Rick, I'm sorry I wasn't able to get you on the air. It wasn't time to negotiate that, so I hope that was I did a good job conveying your questions to Jimmy. Hang on, we'd like to give you a copy of Jimmy's book, The Bible is a Catholic Book. Just stay on the line and Edgar will get that to you. Jimmy Akin's been our guest. Check out the Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World at mysterious.fm or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, check out the newer Jimmy Akin podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, or at Jimmy's YouTube channel. That'll do it for us. We'll see you next time, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.